This is the 5th episode of our media theory series, and the whole series is supposed to consist of 10 episodes, so we're halfway through. Today's episode is on media theories from the left. In the previous episode on Guy Debord and his Society of the Spectacle, we saw Debord's hope for a proletarian revolution against a society of the spectacle. He presented a dystopian vision of mass media as some sort of global show business, a late 20th century hyper-capitalism, heavily relying on television and film, which he wanted to subvert and bring down. Debord represents a left media theory, like Adorno and Horkheimer, that is deeply skeptical of the culture industry and mass media. This kind of left theory tends to express a preference for a more authentic life beyond mass media. It tends to look at mass media as a sort of global Truman show that needs to be dismantled to return to authenticity. Today, however, we look at different media theories from the left that embrace mass media and later social media as a tool of liberation. From this perspective, mass and social media are, perhaps even more than armed struggle, an important weapon to bring about revolution. And what is more, they are the social forum where true egalitarian democracy will be realized. There's a strong faction on the left that regards mass and social media as both means and ends of a socialist liberation project. Historically, the role of the mass media, and specifically of print media, in revolutions from the left, or in modern revolutions in general, cannot be overestimated. Journalism was essential, for instance, in both the French and the Russian Revolution. Main revolutionaries were also journalists. Think of Jean-Paul Marat's role as a leading agitator of the French Revolution, or for that matter, of Lenin, whose revolutionary activities were also very much focused on journalism. And importantly, Karl Marx too was a journalist. In the 1840s, Marx already recognized the effects of globalization, especially regarding what is now called networking. He wrote in the Communist Manifesto, "The need of a constantly expanding market for its products chases the bourgeoisie over the entire surface of the globe. It must nestle everywhere, settle everywhere, establish connections everywhere." The connections he had in mind were not only transport like ships and railroads, but also communicative connections, what we call media today. He wrote, "The bourgeoisie, by the rapid improvement of all instruments of production, by the immensely facilitated means of communication, draws all, even the most barbarian nations into civilization." However, according to Marxist dialectics, the very means by which capitalism dominates the world will also be the means, once appropriated by the working class, causing its downfall. He wrote, "Not only has the bourgeoisie forged the weapons that bring death to itself, it has also called into existence the men who are to wield those weapons, the modern working class, the proletarians. The weapons of the capitalist, which will eventually be used by the workers against them, include communication weapons, the media. Communication media are especially important for realizing a main precondition of the revolution. The workers of the world must unite, and to be able to unite, they must communicate with one another." Marx says, "At this stage, the laborers still form an incoherent mass scattered over the whole country. The workers begin to form combinations, trade unions, against the bourgeoisie. This union is helped on by the improved means of communication that are created by modern industry and that place the workers of different localities in contact with one another. It was just this contact that was needed to centralize the numerous local struggles. Based on this insight into the core role of communication, not just travel but also media communication, in uniting the working class and enabling it to express itself and to guide the revolution, several major thinkers on the left embraced the revolutionary potential of the media. We talked about Walter Benjamin. With the arrival of the internet and social media, the traditional leftist hopes about mass media as a means of radical democratization were revived big time in the 1990s and 2000s. A new wave of populist media optimism, ranging from neo-Marxists to mainstream liberals, arose. Among the theorists of this media liberation theory, many were also liberals, and they were less influenced by Marx and more by ideas like Kant's public use of reason or Jürgen Habermas' new version of this Kantian idea, the vision of a public sphere free of domination. Here are a few random examples. Howard Rheingold published The Virtual Community, Homesteading on the Electronic Frontier in 1993. And his notion of a virtual community emphasized community activism. Manuel Castells published The Rise of the Network Society in 1996, promoting the notion of networks. Other books argued more concretely for an open internet, such as Tim Berners-Lee's Weaving the Web, the original design and ultimate destiny of the World Wide Web from 1999, or Rebecca McKinnon's Consent of the Networked, the worldwide struggle for internet freedom from 2012. On the public or practical front, there were free software advocates like Richard Stallman, the Wiki movement, including my friend Milos Rancic, and political pirate parties advocating digital freedom in several countries. But rather than discussing these diverse thinkers and activists of a wider media liberation theory in the late 20th and early 21st century, I will focus today on one short theoretical text. It's by the German writer Hans Magnus Enzensberger, who lived from 1929 to 2022. And the text is called Constituents of a Theory of the Media, Baukasten zu einer Theorie der Medien. It was published more than half a century ago, in 1970. And I chose it for three reasons. First, it connects well with earlier Marxist media theory. But also second, long before the internet, it already anticipated most of the points later raised by internet media liberation theory. And thirdly, it prompted Jean Baudrillard, who will be the next theorist in this series, to a critical response. A few words on Enzensberger. He was not a proper theorist, but a well-known German writer, essayist, and public intellectual. He played an important role in the 1968 German student protest movement. But later in life, he became more of a conservative and actually distanced himself explicitly from his earlier leftist views. His essay is built around three catchphrases. The first one is emancipatory potential. Enzensberger writes, so far there is no Marxist theory of the media releasing the emancipatory potential which is inherent in the new productive forces. Well, that's not completely true. There was such theory, for instance, in Benjamin, whom actually Enzensberger mentions later on in the essay. But Enzensberger argues here against other leftists at the time, including Adorno and probably De Boer. Enzensberger's main idea is the emancipatory potential media have, according to him. Because of this potential, they can bring about revolution and liberation. But unfortunately, he thinks the potential has so far been repressed, both in capitalism and in Soviet state communism at the time. A second catchphrase is consciousness industry. He uses this term instead of culture industry, which was used by Adorno and Horkheimer. He writes, monopoly capitalism develops the consciousness shaping industry more quickly and more extensively than other sectors of production. It must at the same time fetter it. A socialist media theory has to work at this contradiction. This is a neo-Marxist idea. The center of the capitalist economy has shifted from material to consciousness production, in the form of corporate mass media, for instance. Accordingly, a revolution from the left must take the means of post-industrial production, that's the consciousness industry, or the media, out of the capitalist's hand, make it public, and then use it to overthrow capitalism and practice socialism. The third catchphrase is mobilizing power. Enzensberger says, the open secret of the electronic media, the decisive political factor, which has been waiting, suppressed or crippled for its moment to come, is their mobilizing power. The idea here is that mass media can mobilize people and turn them from passive consumers into active political agents. In other words, the hope is that once the media are in the hands of the people, this will empower them and increase their agency. Here's a fun fact on the side. Enzensberger illustrates this mobilization power of the media by varying a famous catchphrase by Hitler that had become proverbial in Germany. Enzensberger says in his essay that once the media are in the hands of the masses, people will be as free as dancers, as aware as football players, as surprising as guerrillas. In 1935, Hitler had pronounced that the new Nazi German youth would also be very mobile and as swift as greyhounds, as tough as leather, as hard as steel. Well, be that as it may, Enzensberger thinks that mass mobility results from the yet unused technological potential of the mass media. Media, he thinks, will enable reciprocal action between transmitter and receiver. He writes, electronic techniques recognize no contradiction in principle between transmitter and receiver. Every transistor radio is, by the nature of its construction, at the same time a potential transmitter. It can interact with other receivers by circuit reversal. Since radios could also be used to send and not just to receive information, he envisioned in 1970 a kind of radio-based internet. He wrote, radio would be the most wonderful means of communication imaginable in public life, a huge linked system. That is to say, it would be such if it were capable not only of transmitting but of receiving, of allowing the listener not only to hear but to speak, and did not isolate him but brought him into contact. And in connection with this, he even kind of predicted a video-based internet. He wrote, network-like communications models built on the principle of reversibility or circuits, a mass newspaper written and distributed by its readers, a video network of politically active groups. He also presented a half-correct prediction of the difficulty of surveillance of big data. He wrote, a linked series of communications that exceeds a certain critical size can no longer be centrally controlled, but only dealt with statistically. While at least since Edward Snowden, we know that basically all communication on the web today is in fact surveyed, this is still done so only statistically, as Enzensberger says, by technology. There's too much digital communication today so that only a small part of it is actually read by censors or surveillance agents. Similar to Walter Benjamin, Enzensberger welcomed the cultural change brought about by mass media, a shift from elite to popular culture. He wrote, the electronic media are entirely different from the older media like the book. Potentially, the new media do away with all the educational privileges and thereby with the cultural monopoly of the bourgeois intelligentsia. In fact, today, the traditional elitist book culture is in decline and challenged by arguably a more egalitarian online culture. Benjamin celebrated the demise of elitist fine art and the rise of popular film. Enzensberger celebrated the demise of elitist literature and the rise of audio and video recordings produced by anyone, literate or not. He said, "Microphone and camera abolish the class character of the mode of production." Importantly, long before the digital freedom movements of the early 2000s, Enzensberger demanded open, public media. Media should neither be owned and controlled by corporations nor by the state. He said, "The expropriation of Springer," that's a German media corporation, "is a desirable goal, but it would be good to know to whom the media should be handed over. The party? To judge by all experience of that solution, it's not a possible alternative." So for Enzensberger, the new media needed to be in the hands of the masses themselves, and neither owned by capitalists nor run by the government of a one-party state. Here's another fun fact. Enzensberger was tragically wrong in thinking that his media ideal had already been realized, in essence, in the Chinese Cultural Revolution, in the form of the so-called big character posters to the Dazabao. He wrote, "In the China of the Cultural Revolution, wall newspapers functioned like an electronic mass medium. They demonstrate all the more clearly what enormous political and cultural energies are hidden in the enchained masses, and with what imagination they are able at the moment of liberation to realize all the opportunities offered by the new media." Actually, such idealist visions of Mao's China were quite common among European leftists at that time. However, much more realistically, Enzensberger also debunked the naive idea that free media means the disappearance of manipulation. He wrote, "There's no such thing as unmanipulated writing, filming, or broadcasting. The question is therefore not whether the media are manipulated, but who manipulates them. A revolutionary plan should not require the manipulators to disappear. On the contrary, it must make everyone a manipulator." The insight that there is no such thing as non-manipulated media is also, in a very different context, important for Niklas Luhmann's media theory, which we will discuss at the end of this series. Unlike Luhmann, however, Enzensberger thought that mass media could and should somehow be manipulated equally by everyone. Once everyone becomes a manipulator, or perhaps an influencer, as we say today, Enzensberger hoped the interactive public media would transform everyone from passive consumer, interested mostly in entertainment, into active political agent. This is very similar to hopes expressed by some early internet enthusiasts in the 1990s and 2000s, that the World Wide Web would be primarily a form of political activism rather than a place for commerce and entertainment. In the new media, Enzensberger assumed everyone would become a new electronic author so that in the end the masses would become the authors of history. It's of course not the case that everyone on the internet today is a political mobilized agent. And it is highly questionable if that would actually be a good thing. The highly politicized internet bubbles where people fight their respective culture wars today are not necessarily examples of an ideal socialist egalitarian society. Does the internet today resemble more Debord's dystopian spectacle, or Enzensberger's video network of politically active groups? Well, Jean Baudrillard didn't think Enzensberger got it right at all. And we'll discuss this in the next episode.